What's up, YouTube? Welcome to my channel. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about how you can find love in the horoscope. So I'm going to be talking about some planetary combinations and things that you can look at in order to determine the nature of your love. Because, whenever I am, practicing astrology, most times people are coming to me and asking me about their love life. And so that is a very hot area within astrology. And me personally, I don't get like very deep into the synastry and the composite charts and all of that. I'm not saying that they aren't useful. I definitely take them into account when it comes to love compatibility, but you can also gain a lot of information just by studying your own natal chart. And I'll talk about how you can do that because what I'm going to be practicing is a more traditional medieval Renaissance form of astrology, whereby not every single thing in the chart is going to be speaking of you directly. And what that allows us to do is to find, the partner in your birth chart and speak about them from an objective point of view. So that is one thing that we're gonna discuss in this video. But the main planet that I'm going to be talking about is Venus. I like this picture right here of Venus. And that is because Venus is the goddess of love. She represents romance, harmony, pleasure, love, sex, intelligence, our reproductive organs, and her placement in the chart, meaning her local determination, which would be her sign, house, or aspect, is going to show your approach to relationships and what you will encounter in love, and as well as your desire nature. And so Venus is one of the appetitive planets, the moon being the other. And so Venus shows what you have an appetite for, what you want, what you desire, and again, what you'll experience in love. And so it's more than just the sign that she's in, it's also going to be the house and her aspects. It's going to paint the full picture of what you will be experiencing in love. And so if you notice, if you've been in any, you know, let's say at least two or three relationships, you may notice a certain theme or pattern that shows up in your relationships. That's Venus. Now, Venus, she has rulership mainly over three signs, Taurus, Libra, and Pisces. And so when she is in those signs, she is essentially dignified, meaning she's comfortable, she's able to be herself, and she is going to want to indulge in the things that she represents, which is, you know, love, art, entertainment, music. And by no means does Venus being in the sign of her dignity guarantee happy love or romance, as you'll see in some of the examples I'm going to talk about today. But what it does do is show that the person does want love, or they are going to be very Venusian, meaning they're going to want to be in a relationship and be able to share their self with somebody else. And the reason that this is important is because this is going to be the foundation of where I'm going to be talking about in the video, dignity, because ultimately the planets are what make things happen, and the sign and house placement can render a planet strong or weak. And so if a planet is weakened, it isn't going to be able to bring about its significations in a clear way. And so what's the guy's name? Benjamin Dykes speaks about planets that are strong, which means they are in their domicile or exaltation. Those planets as being durable, somewhat predictable, and very consistent. And when a planet is in a sign opposite of the ones that it rules, that planet is said to be, unpredictable, alternative, not able to express itself in a normal way. And so Venus, in that case, would experience stability in the three signs, Aries, Scorpio, and Virgo. So she has stability in the two Mars signs plus Virgo. And so if you see Venus in Virgo, Aries, or Scorpio, this is gonna be one of the main things that's going to indicate trouble with love. And so a lot of people, they'll write on Reddit or on AstroSeek, on Facebook, or on any type of forum, and they'll post the chart and be like, "What's wrong with my love life? Why can't I find somebody? Why am I single?" And blah 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 blah. And you'll look at the chart and you'll see they have Venus in Virgo, and I'm like, well, that's why, because the planet in your chart that is responsible for bringing about love is challenged. Therefore, it's not going to be expressed in a, healthy, or it's not going to be expressing itself in a very strong and powerful way. Now, again, I'm going to be talking about Venus a lot, but I'm also going to be talking about the seventh house. And so it is important to know the rulerships and the different types of rulership of all of the planets, mainly the domicile and exaltation. And bonus points if you can memorize the triplicity. But those are what's going to be important, because those, if you have a planet in your chart and if it's in the seventh house or responsible for the seventh house, or if it's with Venus and it's in a sign of adversity or depression, that's going to be an issue for the topic that that planet is representing. I'll also just go ahead and mention there are other ways that a planet can become strengthened or weakened. And so a planet can become weakened if it is under the beams of the sun. So if it's in within 15 degrees of the sun, that is going to burn that planet out and render it invisible and incapable of being able to produce. A planet becomes strengthened when it is within 17 minutes of the sun. This is known as Casimir, and it is said to be on its throne when it is there. And so that planet takes on a certain superpower. And so that could be something that we can look at in the charts as well. Um, a planet also becomes weakened if it is in an aspect with a malefic. And so a malefic planet, the malefic planets are Mars and Saturn. And so if a planet is, so for instance, Venus, if your Venus is with Mars or Saturn, like mainly the hard aspects, so a conjunction, a square, a semi-square, a sesqui-square, or an opposition, that's going to show where that planet is going to be impeded. And then I'm going through this kind of quickly because I want to keep the topic about, relationships and love, but I also have to lay down the framework so that we can understand how we're going to be approaching it. And then one other way a planet can become weakened is if it's retrograde, because it's not moving forward, it's going backwards, and it takes on an unpredictable nature. Mm. And the 12 houses are very important to memorize, because a planet can become weakened or strengthened by its house placement. So the first, 10th, 7th, and 4th are the strongest houses. These are known as the angles, and that is because when the sun are at those houses, it is when it changes direction. And so that dynamic energy produces a lot of visibility. So planets in that house, they're visible, they're able to be prominent, and they push their significations forward. Next in strength would be the succeeded houses, which are the second, fifth, 11th, and eighth house. And those houses are also strong and have a certain degree of visibility, and they can also push the topics forward. And then the weakened houses would be the cadent houses, which are 3, 6, 9, and 12. And those planets in those houses are said to be in retreat, and they don't have much visibility. And so if we're talking about the planet Venus here, if your Venus is in an angular house, that can suggest that you could be in a relationship that is publicly acknowledged, formal, and where it sees the light of day. And if Venus is in a cadent house, that could suggest that love may play a more background role in your life, or you may struggle to be in a relationship that is publicly acknowledged. And so, one of the things that we see with Venus in the 12th house is secret or hidden relationships. And that's because the 12th house is a cadent house, but it is also invisible. Now, beyond looking at the planets from the standpoint of representing strength based on their house location, we can also look in the chart based on the house location to see where the person may experience love or where they can meet a potential partner. And so right away when Venus is if and this is not and to be honest, this is kind of meant to be taken along with a lot of the other things I'm going to talk about because I really try to stay away from that whole signs and houses type, I mean, planets and houses type of astrology, because it is much more nuanced than that, because you have to take into account the houses that that planet is ruling and its dignity and all other types of things. So this is just meant to be sort of corroborative and supplemental to give an idea of where you can be looking to find love. So don't rely on this particular part that I'm about to go into. Don't take that and run with it. Kind of use that to add to the interpretation of Venus. So Venus in the first house, well, that's more so talking about the person. And so the person is going to be Venusian and is going to be embodying Venus in a very prominent way. So they may be an entertainer or an artist themselves. Now, the second house represents money, our livelihood, and our possessions. And so, if you have Venus in the second house, you could meet a partner, um, maybe at a bank location. The partner could be in an establishment that is dealing with money. It could be at a restaurant, or it could just be in a place that you frequent pretty often. If you have Venus in the third house, you may find love while you're on the road. You could meet a partner through a sibling. You could meet a partner through a relative. A partner could be a potential partner could be a friend of a sibling or a friend of a relative. And maybe when you're somewhere, just because the third house represents traffic in the local town. So maybe when you're at the mall or at the grocery store during your everyday routine, this could be where you may run into a potential partner. The fourth house is the family home, and it is the nighttime house. And so you could meet a partner at maybe at like a nightclub if Venus is in the fourth house, maybe even at a family function. So keep that in mind, because that family theme is going to have to show up some type of way. I always like to look at the third and the fourth house as being like the kinship, family, relative thing. Yeah, so I like to look at them together. But Venus in the fourth house could show where your partner may even be somehow connected with your family. It's not suggesting incest. I mean, I don't, you never know, because there are some people that are in it, that, and they have charts. And so, but no, that's not a typical Venus in the fourth house thing. But what I will say is that Venus in the fourth can show where you may come from a background of being raised by women. And so that may color your approach to relationships. Now, Venus has her joy in the fifth house, as you can see right here. And so, Venus in the fifth house, you could meet a partner like outdoors, maybe at a club, at a theater, somewhere where you go for recreation and enjoyment. And the fifth house also represents children. And so perhaps, maybe you could be at a park, or maybe you could be picking your child up from daycare, and you may meet a potential lover. And then Venus in the sixth house, as you can see, this is the house of bad fortune. And so this is an impediment for Venus. And so right away, if you have Venus in this house, just know that she's going to really struggle here because this is the house of Mars, where there's a lot of obstacles and enmity and things to overcome. And Mars is the planet that likes to fight. And so he is able to come in this house and be strong. But Venus is all about love and pleasure. So when she comes into this house, she can experience quite a bit of obstacles in love. And but in terms of locations where a person may meet a partner, this could be at maybe a hospital, in the service industry. It could be because there's a strong submissiveness and dominance associated with the sixth house. And so perhaps you may get into a relationship with someone that is your boss, or if you are like a manager, you may form a relationship with an employee or someone that is beneath you, in terms of your employee hierarchy. So there could always be that. There could be an age difference, or there could just be a theme of submission in general when it comes to relationship, whether it's coming from you or the other person. Now, Venus in the seventh house, this is good in terms of the angularity that the seventh house brings. And so here we can see that the relationship should be able to see the light of day. Again, you got to take other things into account because the sun could be here and combusting Venus, which would make her invisible, which could kind of, you know, take away from some of that visibility. But in general, Venus in the seventh house could show where you are able to be in a relationship that is publicly acknowledged, that is formal, and it can show where you may be very attracted to your spouse and they may be, which I mean, and not everybody is, but Venus in the seventh house does produce, can, show where you and your partner may bond and have similar interests when it comes to music and entertainment. And then Venus in the eighth house is um if Venus is in one of her signs, it's much better because she will bring about more of the favorable sides of the eighth house, such as other people's resources, other people's money. But this is a house that is connected with darkness because it does not form a natural aspect with the ascendant. And so here we can see where, a relationship could cause you to go through some things if Venus is in the eighth house. Um, just right away, the eighth house is the house of trauma and crisis. And so for some people, Venus being in the eighth house and it's afflicted could show where there's sexual trauma. And so this is a very precarious placement. And in terms of locations, the eighth house can represent infrequented areas. Um, so you may meet a partner in an area where you've never been before. The eighth house also represents recycling, trash cans, elimination. Um, it's a very seedy type of house, and so we could represent like being on a seedy side of town, or there could be some element of danger associated um with it. And you could meet a partner at a AA meeting or at therapy or something like that. Venus being in the ninth house. Now, the ninth house is a cadent house. So it isn't the most visible, but it is a very favorable house in terms of it has a lot of great, significations. And so Venus in the ninth house for you, you may meet a partner at a church or at a college university. The cadent houses are connected with travel. And so this is indicative of being in a long distance relationship or even being in a relationship with somebody of a different nationality, somebody that is foreign, somebody that is from a different background, in some way, somehow, religion, education, or divination could come and be involved in that when Venus in the ninth house. And again, yeah, so Venus in the 10th, so Venus would be culminating. This is really good for maybe producing a career that involves beauty or having a certain aesthetic or being a brand ambassador, but also working in the entertainment industry. And the 10th house is a angular house. angular house, which again means it has that visibility and it's going to bring the significations of Venus forward. So you could be in a relationship that is prominent and well known, or some way your reputation is colored by your relationship or by your love life. And then Venus in the 11th house of good spirit. This is the very, very favorable house. And so with this one, it can show where a friend could become a lover. Oh, yeah, let me go back to the 10th. I didn't mention the location. So 10th house locations could be, at an official establishment, so at a government establishment, a very important place, or at your work or your job. That would be the 10th house. Now, the 11th house, um, you may be able to find love through maybe a friend, and so a friend could become a lover. A friend could also introduce you to someone, and that's how you all end up getting into a relationship. But also the 11th house deals with groups, associations, and networks, and so you may join an online dating group or a dating website, or you may just be affiliated with certain organizations and you could meet a potential partner that way. And then finally, Venus in the 12th house. This is a cadent house, and it is seen as a malefic house because it is the house of Saturn. And just like with the 6th house, this house is a house that is uncomfortable for Venus. And so here, Venus isn't able to really see the light of day, which can, in terms of what it means for people who have this placement, is it could show up as secret relationships, hidden relationships, um, and it could just show where the relationship could bring a lot of suffering, sorrow, loss, and there could be heartbreak along with that. So again, take all of that and use that to build your assessment of the love life when speaking about Venus, because there's so much more to it than just the house it that Venus is in. Because remember, the main thing about the house is going to be the planet that rules that particular house. Now, I want to get into some like planetary combinations dealing with Venus, because this I have found to show up and be very prominent when it comes to um planetary combinations. And this would be the aspects that Venus would be making. Now, I will say you can take all of the aspects into account, but I tend to focus on the hard aspects, which would be the conjunction, the square, semi-square, the sesqui-square, and the opposition. And then the sextiles and trines are the same. They're just a bit more fluid, but the hard aspects are the aspects that manifest and materialize. And so that's why for this particular part, mainly take a look at the hard aspects that Venus is making. And so when we see Sun and Venus together, again, if depending on how close Venus is in, that is not really good for Venus and it's really good for the Sun. And it can show where the person may, if Venus is under the beams, the person may get married in secret, or the relationship could be hidden, or you may feel like your partner is sort of overshadowing you in some type of way. Um, when you see Sun and Venus, that normally brings a high degree of subjectivity into the relationship, from my opinion, because typically the person is going to be they're going to be approaching the relationship from the standpoint of what they want and what they need, and they may have a hard time separating themselves from a partner. That's what I tend to see with Sun Venus. With the Moon Venus, this is the motherhood axis in general, but it can produce a relationship that goes through a lot of changes, one that fluctuates a lot. And if you have the square or opposition, that does tend to produce emotional dissatisfaction when it comes to love. And so that's the one that may bring a heartbreak early on or at some point in life. And as a result, it can cause the person to kind of put up barriers where they may not fully let the person in. And so those two planets being in a harsh aspect, that's something that would have to definitely be worked out in order for a person to have any sustainable relationship because the moon is just so important when it comes to the type of person that you are. And with that one, your needs could conflict with your wants, and you may have trouble kind of getting what you want. So I once had somebody who had the moon Venus square and they were in the mutable signs. The mutable signs are also referred to as double bodied, which means two. So that's Sagittarius, Pisces, Gemini, and Virgo. And with that one, he ended up having like issue with being able to be with just one woman because Venus again was in a double-bodied sign, and with those two planets squaring each other, he was able to one woman, fulfilled his needs while another woman fulfilled his wants. And so the wants would be Venus and the needs would be the moon. And so when those two planets come into hard conflict with each other, that can just be a hard time getting your needs and your wants aligned. So, and that can just, as you can imagine, produce, issues in love. And then Mercury, Venus, this aspect, when you see this together in somebody's chart or in your chart, this can produce an artist, someone that is a dancer, light on their feet, an entertainer that may be an attraction like towards like things that keep them youthful. And it can also produce an attractive voice because Mercury represents the voice. But Mercury Venus also has a sort of dark side because it can produce, multiple relationships, and it can show where if there are certain signs that this combination is in, such as like Libra, a Capricorn, a Taurus, or even Scorpio, where the person could be, or Aries or Leo, the person could be rather unprincipled in love. And so they may be like too lustful, and sex may always be on the mind. And in general, there's a very cerebral love nature with this one. And again, this is the one of the ones that can bring multiple relationships because Mercury represents multiples. And then Venus and Mars, this is the classic battle of the sexes combination. And when you see these two planets together in a chart, typically it's going to be speaking about the person's sex life. And so that is just one thing that that combination can produce, but it can also show an amorous love nature, an intense love nature. And keep in mind Mars is a malefic. And so if Mars is in a sign that doesn't dignify him like Scorpio, Capricorn, or Aries, even if he are is in those signs, that could just show where in general with this aspect they can produce like conflict, strife, violence in love. So love is passionate, and a lot of times you see those people that are like so madly in love and can't keep their hands off of each other, and those relationships tend to get volatile the most. And so that just comes with the Venus Mars territory. And so you just have to keep that in mind, that when you have Venus and Mars, you may come on a little too strong, or your feelings could be a bit too intense, and you have to watch that. Venus, Jupiter, this is an aspect. There's this astrologer by the name of Garth Astro or Antoine Garth, and he always says that Venus and Jupiter can produce too much of a good thing. And I agree, because Venus and Jupiter are the benefics, and so they deal with what we enjoy. And so when this comes together, we can show well a person could completely immerse themselves in a relationship, and there could be a lot of generosity towards a lover or vice versa. This is another one that can produce long distance relationships, a partner of a different nationality or ethnicity, not being grounded in love, being taken for granted in love, taking too many chances. But this is also an extremely romantic aspect, and these people tend to want to go all out, or they may expect a lot when it comes to love. And so you may, especially if this is in an air sign, you may have to check your ideas, because sometimes your standards may be too high, or you may be blowing things out of proportion. That Venus Jupiter is not a balanced aspect whatsoever, but it is But it is an amazing aspect because it can produce a lot of good fortune. But typically, things can just get out of control with that if you're not careful. And then Venus Saturn, this combination is interesting because I have heard some people refer to Venus and Saturn as being friends, but I don't tend to see Venus and Saturn working in a very harmonious way. What I tend to see with this combination is, Saturn is excessively or intemperately cold and dry, and Venus is warm and moist. And so Saturn slows her down, he cools the order, and he restricts Venus. And so what we typically see is a coldness when it comes to love, or maybe separation in love, feeling alienated, loneliness, again, separation. There could also be a noticeable age difference with Venus and Saturn, or just with Saturn in the seventh house. One way Venus and Saturn can show up is through an arranged marriage. And then Venus and Uranus together. Um, this I noticed this can bring a lot of, like, the person wants, like, their love life could be just full of excitement, full of change, and they could, you know, suddenly go through a divorce and then suddenly get remarried and, or get with somebody else. But in general, these people are very self-willed and they love independence and they may try to maintain a lot of independence within a relationship. And so that could be a problem when it comes to, like, getting close to that person. But when you have Venus and Uranus together, you're given the opportunity to do things differently. So you may be in an alternative relationship, or you can see where the relationship may buck the trend of society in some sort of way. Venus and Uranus, just like Venus and Saturn, this is the separation or divorce axis. So you definitely want to watch for that, especially when it comes to maybe an activated perfection year, or if we see this in a solar return chart, and let's say it's being very um much so aspected to your own natal chart in the solar return chart, that can show where that if you are in a relationship where that may be a year where you could have a lot of instability and sudden change when it comes to love. And then Venus, Neptune, this one produces fantasy. Um, just like the Jupiter one, it can make it where you could be a bit ungrounded, in some cases delusional, but there tends to be a love for luxury. This is like the dream come true. So these people are very idealistic and they may even have mystical experiences in love, but Neptune can be, or is very deceptive. And so this can show being deceived in love, being conned, being cheated, being made the victim. It can show disappointments in love, misplaced feelings, and unusual love. And then Venus Pluto is a combination that can show where you may get into a relationship that changes your life. So an intense love life, a relationship could regenerate. And that's that make up to break up, and it just goes through certain rebirths. So you may break up with somebody and then years later y'all get back together. That's Venus Pluto, especially if any of the water signs are involved in that combination, because the water signs have a tendency to proliferate. But the dark side of this is that Pluto is a planet that can be very controlling and possessive. In fact, the myth of Pluto represents kidnap and rape. And so know that Venus and Pluto can get very intense. And the this is one of those fatal attraction aspects along with Venus and Mars. So the next thing I want to talk about is the seventh house. Now, the seventh house is the house of relationships and partnerships. And so the planet that rules sign on the seventh house cusp will be the planet that represents the spouse or the partner. And so, one of the things that traditional astrologers did was look to see if the ruler of the first house and the ruler of the seventh house to see if they were in an applying aspect with each other. I'll say just in any aspect with each other. So that means if let's just um go to a chart because I want to go over a few chart examples of some prominent people or just some people in general that have particular peculiar love issues and look to see if we can see that in the chart. But the planet that rules the seventh house represents the partner. So in this chart, we see Jupiter is ruling the seventh house. And the planet that rules the first house would be Mercury because Gemini is on the ascendant. And so we don't see we don't see any connection between Mercury and Jupiter, except the fact that there is some reception. There is no aspect, but Jupiter is in Mercury's domicile or exaltation. So there is that connection there. But in general, you want to see those two planets that are aspecting each other because that's going to show or increase the potential for marriage or relationship. It is when there is no connection between those two rulers of those houses, whereby there is, where there can show where there is no connection. So in this case, any aspect is better than no aspect. And even if it's a square, an opposition, whatever, that's better than no aspect. But also keep in mind that when it comes to the chart, I like to try to extend it to see if there is just any connection between the Lord of the seventh house and either the moon or Mercury, because that is also a way that the partner is establishing connection with the particular person. Also, to see if the ruler of the first house is in has any type of connection with any planets in the seventh house. That is also something that I would, look to see. And when it comes to rulers of the houses, the planet that is said to also represent the spouse is the first triplicity ruler of that sign on the seventh house cusp. So in this case, it's a nighttime chart. It would be Jupiter again. So Jupiter would be, really representing this partner. But let's say it was some other planet, then we would also see if there is a connection between that planet and the ruler of the first house. And so this is the chart of Will Smith. He was born September 25th, 1968 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at 9:47 p.m. And I am using a whole sign chart. For this one, you can use whatever chart you feel comfortable using. I do use quadrant house systems, but I like to use whole sign for natal charts. But I chose Will Smith because he had a pretty unconventional marriage, a very high profile marriage, and he's also been married twice. And so he married Cherie Zampino in 1992, and they later divorced in 1995, and the two had one son. And then in 1997, Will Smith married Jada Pinkett Smith um, on December 31st, which is interesting. And they actually met on the set of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which would be, his work. And so in this chart, let's see, she is in the house of her joy, and she is in the sign um of her domicile, but she is at the anaretic degree, which is, not good. But just to start off, Venus being in her own sign in the fifth house can produce an entertainer, someone that works in the entertainment industry, a singer, an actor, a performer. And Will Smith, as we all know, is all of those things. And so that's definitely showing that where Venus's significations are being pushed forward. Notice, well, I'm jumping ahead. I'll get to that. I want to also, so, so Jada and Will, they have a pretty unconventional marriage whereby it can be described as, polyamorous, where there are extramarital affairs, and the two have both either directly or indirectly express interest in other people while they're married together. But when you see them, they always like have like a united front. But they have been pretty open about their unconventional arrangements. And so Venus being with Mercury, as I mentioned earlier, Venus Mercury, that tends to show multiple relationships. And so, that can show him being an entertainment or an artist, a musician, but he can also represent someone that is quite flirtatious, lustful, someone that frequently thinks of love, and it can show Mercury partners. And so this is the aspect, in my opinion, that's really highlighting the polyamorous relationship. And if we notice, Venus is ruling the 12th house. And the 12th house is the house of secrets or privacy or hidden things. And so she is bringing that level of secrecy into the fifth house. So um that's definitely showing again like kind of the unconventionality of the relationship and the secrecy that could be involved in that as well. Um Now Will's ascendant is conjunct Aldebaran, and that can produce wealth, power, courage, rise to authority, and it is said to produce marital success. And he has been married since 1997. I was born in 1997, so he's been married for 25 years as of now, which is that's a long time. And so I can see why, despite the fact that the marriage is unconventional, it could be viewed as successful because the two have been married for a very long time. Even if they were to get divorced, that's still a long time to be married. And um that could be attributed again to Aldebaran being conjunct his ascendant. That could also produce injuries to the face and pains in the head and fevers. Now, Venus is in a 180-degree relationship with Saturn. So as we can see, here's Venus, and then here's Saturn. They're opposite each other. And remember, one of the impediments for a planet is if it is in a harsh contact with a malefic. And as you can see, this is a malefic that is the most malefic. It is in the sign of its fall in retrograde. And so this planet, this Saturn, is gonna produce some pretty paralytic situations for this person where they may feel like they're trapped in a relationship or they may feel paralyzed in some way when it comes to love. And so that could be part of the story. Saturn is ruling the eighth and the ninth house in this chart. And so I'm wondering how, and the midheaven, I'm wondering how that manifested itself in terms of his life because this right here should produce some problems. And it, can produce separations in love. So we could point to the first marriage ending rather abruptly and the second marriage, and note that Sagittarius, the sign on the house of marriage, is a double body sign, meaning two. He's been married twice. So that's interesting. But with that one, we have seen a bit of public, you know, scrutiny concerning his marriage, especially that whole August Alsina scandal, and even other things that went on. And that is also showing that Venus Saturn, where that could have caused them to be separate. They probably live very separate lifestyle. I wouldn't be surprised if they were like when you think about a married couple, you think about them living together and sharing the same bedroom. I would venture to say is they probably live in two totally different sides of the house. They probably are not connected whatsoever. And it's probably just like a public front because from what I'm seeing with that Venus and Saturn, it could show where there could just be a strong obstacle and then a lot of distance and a lot of separation. And Saturn in this case is serving to corrupt Venus because he is in the sign of her detriment. And so that's not good for Venus. And so that could have been a third party or something that something that negatively impacted the relationship, definitely. And with that one, he could potentially lose a lot of money through a divorce. That's one thing that could produce because Saturn is ruling the eighth house. Now, in terms of Jada, she would be represented by Jupiter in Virgo. And it's interesting that in real life, she is a Virgo, her sun is in Virgo. But with Jupiter being in Virgo, this is the sign of Virgo's debility, his detriment when he's in Virgo. And so that could show where she could be unhappy or in a state of adversity within this marriage, or she could function in a way that may not be the most beneficial, especially because she is co-present with Mars, which could cause her to be hyper, nitpicky and be maybe the one that really wears the pants in terms of the relationship. And that is supported by the fact that Jupiter is with Pluto, and that can make someone, power hungry, the desire to lead. She could be, and quite possibly, she may just have a more dominant personality and be better at leading than Will is because, he's Mercury Venus here, which can make someone, kind of superficial, kind of, licentious, very idealistic, and maybe not the most firm versus this, Jupiter Pluto, which is going to be somebody that's going to mainly be focused on, wealth, control, and power, but in general could have, the innate ability to wield a lot of influence over will. And so I do see that this can show where the partner, or she may be kind of in a more superior position when it comes to wielding her influence. And notice that she is 10 houses away from the seventh house, which that's showing where they met at work or they met at, on the set of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But they could also show where she may be the one that is sort of in control in terms of the relationship. And she may be also be unhappy. I see them both as being unhappy, but she may also just be unhappy within the relationship. And she could have been the one that was the catalyst for it being so unconventional because with that Pluto, she's going to have a need for something that is more than just things that are surface level or things that are vanilla. And so that's pretty much it for Will. It's really explanatory, like the first divorce, that Venus Saturn, but also the, you know, the publicness of it, I think could be seen by the fact that Saturn is ruling that midheaven. And this is the chart of Tyrese. I included Tyrese because Tyrese has I don't I know he's been married twice. I don't know if he's been married more times than that. But I just know that a few years ago he went through a very public divorce and child custody and child support issues with that wife. And he very abruptly married another woman after that divorce, and now they're currently going through a divorce. And um, he's been ordered to pay like so much money in child support, and so he's kind of been on social media once again, talking about that. And you know, Tyrese has exhibited a lot of unstable behavior online, especially when it comes to him having to part with his money. He was caught trying to downplay how much money that he made when it was revealed that he made $2 million from the Fast and the Furious. And so, yeah, the course really came down hard on him. And I want to see if there is any wet love signatures he have in his chart that could show that. So, first off, he is a Scorpio rising, which can make him private and someone that is secretive, agenda based, and there could be a relentless pursuit of his aims, and he could have to fight in order to maintain his position. That is just true of Scorpio in general, that theme of having to fight. Now, Venus is rising, which does, Venus represents again music. So this makes him inclined towards music, but also inclined towards needing to be in a relationship, needing to be with a woman. It could also make him very lustful, very sexual, and it can make him be an entertainer, a dancer, or a musician because Venus rules all those things. Now, Venus is ruling the seventh house of relationships because Taurus is on the seventh. And with her being in the first house, that is reinforcing his need to be in a relationship. And where there may be a hard time, he may have a hard time separating himself from his lover. He may see her as an extension of himself. And Uranus is also rising, which can give somebody a pretty erratic and unstable character. It can make them very cerebral and in some cases very intelligent, but it can make a person willful and unpredictable. And we see the combination that I mentioned earlier, Venus, Uranus together, and that would speak to the sudden divorce, but also the sudden remarrying that he went through in terms of his relationships. And I think the issue in this chart is actually Tyrese. And I came to that conclusion based on like studying his chart. And I say that because his Mars is representing him. His Mars is in Capricorn. So that can one just make him very driven to achieve what he wants. He could be very relentless again, but this can also point to him being arrogant, overestimating his abilities, and having a superiority complex because planets that are in the sign of their exaltation, especially when that planet represents the first house, can show where a person may be arrogant or they may just have this sense of, overestimation. And that could potentially be what is causing conflict in his relationship with the women because notice that the two female planets, Venus and Moon, are essentially weakened. They're in signs that debilitate them. And so within his life, the women that are showing up via the women that he naturally attracts or the women that he is going after, it isn't, you know, it's just there's an issue there. He isn't attracting the right women. He's attracting the wrong women, or he's probably also going after the wrong women. And that's causing an issue because Mars is between the sun and the moon. And when you see Mars moon together, that can represent number one, it can show a woman that is angry, a woman that is aggressive, but they can also show a separation from a woman or being at odds or being in a fight with a woman. And so I find that very interesting that when it comes to those planets being those two female planets being debilitated in his chart, I find that it's coming from this Mars here because you see this Mars is afflicting this moon and it's ruling this Venus here. So, and another reason I said that I feel like he could be the problem is because he has Mercury Neptune. So here's Mercury and Sagittarius with Neptune, and that combination can produce like that fantasy thought, delusional thinking, misrepresenting the truth. Remember, this is the second house of money, and this can show him misrepresenting his assets because he didn't want to reveal how much money he made because he didn't want to pay the large child support. But with that Mercury Neptune there, especially with Mercury being in the sign of his detriment, that was something that you could tell was intentional. But it's a great aspect for an actor, and it gives the ability to shift character because this is a double-bodied sign, meaning there's two, so he's really good at shifting character. But he could have some delusional beliefs that that Mercury, Neptune, Sagittarius can show where somebody may again have a superiority complex, but they could be maybe kind of delusional in that, and they may just have a grandiose sense of self, and their thoughts aren't rooted in reality. And yeah, I kind of, yeah, this right here is a problem. They're hot and dry energy. And that ego, you see the ruler of the ascendant is with the sun, with the ego, and then the ruler of the seventh is in the first, detriment. So if you all are noticing, each and every one of these charts where we see issues with love, we see where Venus isn't doing too hot. In this chart, we see Venus afflicted, by that Saturn. And in this chart, I would consider this Uranus Venus system an affliction for Venus, especially because Venus is in the sign of her adversity. And then the moon is in the sign of her fall. So this person definitely has issues with women, and also he's been married. So he might get married again, actually, because if you see Mars, the ruler of the first, and Venus, the ruler of the second, they're in aspect with each other, but they're separating. So that could be another interpretive point. And then lastly, this is the chart of not a celebrity, but someone I know personally that has issues in love. So this is someone who she was in a relationship with a much older woman. So this person is probably about 21, 22, and the partner is she's in her 50s. And there is a bit of mental health issues that exist between both people. And in fact, um they met at a I guess like a center, for people with behavioral problems or whatever. But to make a long story short, these two people got into a relationship together and it became extremely volatile, extremely toxic. It was a situation where the police had to be called. It was a situation where they would argue, but then get back together like nothing happened, and break up again, and get back together. And it eventually led to the person who owns this chart to them kind of really going through some tough emotional times where they had to be hospitalized for a certain period of time. And so, and that was definitely, something that this person was already dealing with, but was just definitely intensified by their relationship. And so the first thing to notice in this chart is that the ruler of the first is Jupiter, and it is in the sign of its detriment and retrograde. And so and the planet that is responsible for your life is in such a weakened state, it can show where the person may not be the most they may not have the most faith in themselves. They may feel like they're inadequate or weakened in some way, or they may feel like they don't measure up, or there just could be some issues with the person. Sometimes it may be physical, sometimes it may be mental, but there definitely could just be something there. And in some cases, it may just be the self-esteem, which of course can be, worked on. But the issue is that this Jupiter, this chart ruler, is giving itself to the other person. So this is someone who doesn't necessarily feel the strongest on its own. And so it throws itself into this house of relationships. And when they go into relationships, we'll look at Mercury, which is going to be the planet that represents relationships and represents the um partner. We find that those energies are in the 12th house with this fallen moon. And so what happens is that this person gets into a relationship and they experience all type of obstacles, trauma, and suffering, and that can just cause them to This experience a lot of, yeah. So the way I looked at it was I feel like this partner sort of, and this is metaphorically speaking, poisoned this person because this was a much older person that got with this person, and the Mercury is sort of, kind of a bad influence on adding a bad influence to this moon. And so that whole moon Mercury thing is causing what because what happened was this person began to have a lot of, you know, delusions and overestimated the partner, like, and became very paranoid. So the chart holder, after a while thought that this person was, doing roots on them, thought that they had people spying on them, thought that it got so bad where this person would be scared to go places because they thought that the person would be watching them. And so that sort of fixed paranoia is definitely seen by this moon, Mercury, and Scorpio. And no matter what you do, you cannot convince her that this was not happening because of this fixed energy. And it eventually led to this person just being in such a vulnerable state where they had to be, you know, treated by professionals. Now, it isn't always that drastic, but I just think that it is very, cut and dry in this chart. This person is going towards relationships, but when they get there, they experience, the bad spirit, which is suffering, loss, imprisonment. And when we take a look at Venus, the goddess of love, we see that she is in Capricorn. And remember that Venus Saturn does produce an age difference. And most times there's going to be a noticeable age difference. And but the most telling thing is the fact that this Venus is with the dragon's tail or the south node. And that for Venus, so if you see this in your chart, that can be detrimental because it can show where there could be a lot of disillusionment when it comes to love. And when you just put together the social picture of Venus and Capricorn, that represents an older woman. The partner was an older woman, and the dragon's tail can cause disillusionment, can cause sorrow, can cause madness. That's one of the things that is associated with the South Node is madness, and that was that older woman caused this parent to experience this. And look at the moon in aspect with Venus. She's in fall and receiving detriment, you know. So this moon is going towards the love, but ending up in a worse predicament than before, but has such a strong need to stay in a relationship. So I hope you all found this video to be informative. I always, again, like to go over a few charts to demonstrate what it is that, um, to basically demonstrate the things that I spoke about in terms of what I taught all of you, or hopefully you all found or gained something from this video. This, I know it was a lot. And so kind of just, take it in and just approach it in a way that makes sense. So look at your chart and look at your Venus. Is she in a sign that strengthens her, or is she in a sign that makes her weak? you know, what house is she in? That can show a potential area where you may have met a partner, but it can also show the environment that your Venus is in. And remember, if she's in a first, fourth, seventh, or 10th house, she is angular and she has the potential to be she is very visible, and that can manifest as a relationship that can see the light of day and can be publicly acknowledged. The same if she is in a succeeding house, such as the second, fifth, the eighth, or the 11th. Maybe not the eighth. And then the Venus is cadent, meaning she is in house 3, 6, 9, or 12. Love may not be the most Love may be in retreat for you. Let's just say that. And then also look at Venus's aspects. Is she with Mercury, where you may be an entertainer and you also may be fond of thinking about love, speaking about love. You may have the type of persona where you may want to be in, where you may feel like you need more than one person to be in a relationship with. You may like variety with the Mercury. Um, and again, look at the significations of those planets and impress them upon Venus, and that's going to be what you experience. So again, I hope you all found this video informative. And if you did, like this video. If you haven't already done so, subscribe, and thank you for watching.